What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another video, and this time around we're going to be talking about Death Note. So far here on the channel, I've covered 3 of the live-action Japanese Death Note films, and for anybody who's not familiar with what Death Note is all about, it is a manga that was turned into a very popular anime series. Both the manga and the anime are some of the most beloved in the genre, and there have been live-action adaptations. Today we're talking about the Netflix remake that is an American version of the story, and there is another mini-series live-action show that I know leads into one more live-action Japanese film. I don't know when and if I'll cover those at any point, but at some point I do want to rewatch the original anime, which I haven't seen in many years, and cover that here on the channel. But for now, we're going to be talking about the remake that Netflix did just a few years back. And today I'm joined once again on this Death Note journey by Blacktastic Media. So a big thanks to my buddy Tajaya for joining me here in this video to talk about a very lackluster film. So this film is directed by Wingard, who's directed things like Godzilla vs. Kong, as well as things like the VHS films. Not a director who I love all of his films, but definitely a couple in there that I at least enjoy elements of the film, especially something like Godzilla vs. Kong, which isn't the greatest film, but is in a good time to watch as far as the action and the visuals and all of that jazz. And when this movie first came out, I actually checked it out. It was a really rainy night. I believe there may have been a big storm going on, and I was just watching this movie, and after having watched it, I thought to myself, it doesn't really do any justice to the anime itself, but it wasn't the worst thing I'd ever seen. And it was just one of those nights where you're watching a movie and it doesn't really matter what the quality of the film is. You're kind of just throwing something on to kind of entertain yourself. And so I don't really feel like I really absorbed the film all that well. And I also wasn't reviewing films at the time, so I wasn't necessarily watching it as intently as I do today. And so rewatching this film, especially after watching the live action Japanese films and just, knowing the anime, yeah, this is not a good movie. I'll go ahead and start this off by saying that. There are definitely elements of modern day filmmaking that are on display in this film that at times make this maybe the most visually pleasing live action Death Note adaptation, but by no means does this film in any way, shape, or form do any justice to the narrative that the anime or the manga have on display for fans. Yeah, this is definitely a cookie cutter version of what Death Note is all about, and if you've never watched Death Note, never read Death Note, know nothing about Death Note, this is not necessarily a good entryway into it. Without a doubt, the best part about this movie is the casting of Ryuk, played by Willem Dafoe. I really enjoy Willem Dafoe anytime he plays a character, especially a villain. And yeah, you have a very almost Green Goblin-esque performance here with Ryuk, who's kept in the shadows for majority of the film. And I really enjoy seeing some of the behind the scenes of how they kind of made this character using practical effects as well as the digital effects to create the character. But Ryuk is such a cool looking character in the anime, in the manga, and even seeing him in the Japanese films that are live action, even though he doesn't look good by any stretch of the imagination, he's always a really cool looking design of a villain and a character to have in these stories. And so to have him in this movie look really cool but constantly be in shadows is a bit disappointing, especially when you get to the end of the film and you feel like you really haven't gotten much Ryuk at all. Then you have Nat Wolff playing the character of Light, who is our main character, and yeah, he just doesn't embody the character for me. I gotta praise the guy who plays him in the Japanese live action films, because he at least embodied a little bit more of what the character was in the anime, which is a character that's a little bit more stoic, a little bit more serious. He definitely has his moments where he's a little goofy, but for the most part, he's a pretty serious character. And so with this, you have a character who's just, I don't know, that, outcast, kind of weird, just over the top, yelling really loud teenage kid that you see in a lot of American teenage films. And yeah, he just really didn't bring anything to the table that made this version of Light superior to any version or even really all that entertaining. It's hard to really root for any of the characters in this movie because the narrative doesn't really give people a whole lot of motivation for a lot of the things they're doing. There is motivation to some extent, but it's very, very bare bones. They really don't dive deep into who these characters are and why they're doing what they do, and ultimately it just kind of feels like a very rundown, watered down version of what the Death Note story is all about. Now, I mentioned before that one of my favorite parts of this film, without a doubt, is Willem Dafoe as Ryuk, and another casting choice that I definitely have to praise in this film is LaKeith Stanfield as L. Now, the character of L in the anime has some very over-the-top mannerisms. He's constantly jumping on seats and tables and various things like that in a very weird fashion. He sits on chairs as though he's just standing on it and crouching, so he doesn't actually sit on the chairs. And in an anime, it works. He's also one of those characters that a lot of anime have where he's constantly eating things. And again, in anime, those mannerisms make sense. It makes sense for the very goofy, over the top, yet serious at times tone that anime is able to pull off. And when it comes to live action, a lot of times those adaptations and pulling things directly from the anime doesn't always work. And in the live action Japanese films, I would definitely argue that they kind of went the wrong way with it. They went too much trying to do exactly what the character does in the anime, and it comes across a little bit cringe. Whereas with this film, I think LaKeith Stanfield handled it a little bit more subtly. I enjoy his performance as L, and he's without a doubt my favorite live action L out of all of the live action films that have to do with Death Note. Then you have Margaret Qualley, or Qualley, I'm not exactly sure how to pronounce her name, but she plays the love interest in the film named Mia, and yeah, she is bad in this film. Not necessarily the actress, I mean, she's fine, she's giving a decent performance for what the script gave her, but ultimately the character, the script around her character's real purpose in the film is completely and utterly pointless, and she really feels like she serves no purpose in the story other than to complicate Light's life and kind of add more drama to everything that's going on with the Death Note. But other than that, could not care less about her character. Now, I have a little bit more to talk about when it comes to this film, but for now, let's go ahead and hear what Blacktastic Media had to say about this.
Yo, what's up? Yeah, man, it's your boy, teamed up with my main man, Anthony Perez, for another chapter of Death Note. This time, a live action movie that was done back in 2017 on Netflix. Interesting journey with this film. Back in 2017, I heard all the hype about this manga being adapted to American culture in a live action film. Never heard of it before until then. I'm like, let me check this out, right? Let me check this out. All I can say was, 4 years ago, I was watching this film on Netflix. About the halfway point, I turned that joint off. I was not feeling it. Started off really strong. The premise is amazing. Willem Dafoe is Ryuk, the death demon in this film. The kid is in high school this time, all-American white boy, book fall from the sky, the whole nine. L is played by a brother, one of my favorite actors. I'm like, okay. Started off strong. I didn't make it through the whole film. Turn that shit off. I'm here now. I finished it this morning because my man Anthony said, hey man, let's finish this out. So I didn't have to watch the whole movie again, just half of it. Thank God. The director made some stylistic choices that didn't work for me. The way they portrayed the death demon, it was cool. At the same time, you didn't really see it. Just the glowing eyes, the silhouette. You know, Willem Dafoe's voice is amazing, but no, man, wasn't feeling it. And this is the problem that I have with American culture taking from Western civilization. We, as Americans, are fascinated with other cultures. Just like our history, we take and we steal for our own pleasure and good. The Ring, The Grudge, and now Death Note. We take it, we Americanize it, and we make it worse. That's all we do. We are heavily influenced by Asian culture. You know, whether it's martial arts, whatever. I don't care who you are as an American, you ain't never gonna be better than Bruce Lee or Jackie Chan. Just give that shit up. Same thing with anime and manga. We just don't do that kind of art. We just don't do that kind of artwork. And they fucked this up, man. Like I said, I love the premise. You write down somebody's name, they die. This kid's motivation in high school was to impress a girl while he was killing people. I'm like, this is nothing like the book. The dude was a genius. Light was a genius in the manga. This guy he's smart, but you don't even like the main character because he changes. When I was watching the second half of this movie, this dude went from being a recluse to a crazy ass motherfucker. I'm like, well, when you create a god-like person called Kira, your head's gonna get big. Then the authorities get involved. You got L on your ass, running around with no shoes on, eating sugar, hunched over in his chair. You know, it takes some things from the actual manga, but nah, man. It was bad 4 years ago. Why I didn't finish it. Now that I finished it, it's bad. But I blame it on us. Taketh from others and maketh worse. That's all we do, man. This sucks. This stinks. I'm not even a hardcore fan of the manga. I didn't know nothing about the manga until this first film came out in 2017 on Netflix. And yeah, man, it just makes me feel ashamed of what we do as Americans. We take from other cultures and make things worse. So all we do is steal and take and pillage. But hey, if you like this, that's on you. If I offend you, hey, then you don't understand me. But if I can inspire you, trust me, you will learn to love me. Hey, if I offend you, don't worry about it. It's just my point of view. Back to you, Perez, my man.
A big thanks to my buddy Tajaya from Blacktastic Media for joining me here for yet again another Death Note film, and this will probably be the last one that we'd cover here on the channel together, so I look forward to having Blacktastic back on again for other franchises as we move forward and move away from the Death Note series. It's been a lot of fun to do, even though pretty much all of these movies that we've covered, all 4 of them that we've covered so far, have been pretty horrible. But I want to thank my guest once again, Blacktastic Media. You guys can find the link to his channel down below in the description box. Go give him some love, let him know I sent you. But for now, let's go ahead and get into my final thoughts on this movie. Overall, as I mentioned before, I just feel like this movie does not give the franchise and the series any real justice in terms of telling its story properly. If this is your first ever introduction to Death Note, just by no means does it do any justice to really tell you the full scale of these characters, develop these characters, and there's so much that is left out from the anime that it just makes this version just such a lesser version. You just don't really get the full Death Note story at all here, and it doesn't really even tell a really fulfilling story in and of itself. You know, it doesn't even take the basic premise and tell its own beginning, middle, and end that makes you care for these characters. Ultimately, by the time you're nearing the end of the film, you really feel like nothing has happened in the film. It doesn't really feel like much has really progressed, and a lot of the character development feels incredibly rushed. However, what I do want to praise about this film is I do think the cinematography is solid. I think that this film has some really great death sequences. A lot of the deaths and the special effects, whether practical or digital, around the deaths, I think are really solid. Again, I think Ryuk looks great, though he's constantly hidden in shadow, and I think that's definitely one of my biggest gripes about his character, but Willem Dafoe playing him is great. Like I said, LaKeith Stanfield as L, I think is a really solid casting choice. Makes it very different, does something very different with the character, while also giving us those familiar elements about the character of L that you look for in any sort of adaptation of this story. Overall, this is not a film I can recommend to people, and I think if you're actually interested in Death Note in any way, shape, or form, I highly recommend at this point just checking out the anime in and of itself. It's a great telling of the manga. It's a lot of fun. It's creepy. It's eerie. It has that nice dated kind of anime feel and vibe, but it still works in a modern anime world. And ultimately, it tells a really interesting and cool story with a lot of cool lore that is able to be fleshed out a lot lot better in those episodes than in any of these movies that have tried to cram it all into, 2 hours, an hour and a half, whatever the case may be. So 2017's Death Note that came out on Netflix, yeah, not a great movie, not a movie I can recommend, but I definitely want to hear what you guys have to say. Do you like this movie? Do you not like this movie? What do you like about it? What don't you like about it? Definitely want to hear what you guys have to say. So please, again, hit that like button. It really helps the channel out. Comment your thoughts, subscribe for more videos, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye-bye.